And I met Ian Hislop, the editor of Private Eye, in a toilet at a BBC Light Entertainment Christmas party. And I followed him in, and I said to him, "Can I have a column in Private Eye?" And he said, "Do you mind not standing so close to me?" But he said, "Yes, why not?" And he gave me this column called Doing the Rounds. And I initially started writing about junior doctors' working conditions, but I was living in Bristol at the time, and I met a very brave anaesthetist called Stephen Bolson, who was collecting data, had comparative data on the outcomes for heart surgery in different units across Bristol, particularly child heart surgery. He'd worked in different units, and he was concerned that Bristol had a far higher death rate and brain damage rate for operations done in children under 1 year old. And his evidence was pretty robust, but he tried taking it through the correct channels. But in the late 80s, there was no real quality control mechanism at all in medicine. Doctors were jolly good chaps, nurses were angels doing their best. We were all in it together, trying our best, but nothing was measured, nothing was benchmarked. There was no minimum standard for which you audited your work. Most people didn't audit their work. Ironically, heart surgeons were one of the few people who did audit their work. But then, if someone was a significant statistical outlier, there was no mechanism for doing something about it. It was just, well, let's just keep trying and we'll move up the learning curve and everything will be all right. Steve felt this was unacceptable. In fact, the thing that really got him, I think, is there was a surgeon in Bristol whose child needed heart surgery himself, and he took him to Southampton. He said, "Well, I don't want my own child to have heart surgery here, but other children did." So he fed this information to me in Private Eye, and I published it in 1992. In 1999, 7 years later, we had what was then the largest public inquiry in British history. So it took 7 years for this bad news to filter through the system and the establishment feel that they had to act. It was fairly clear back in 1992 that most people in the know, up to the Royal College of Surgeons, the Department of Health, knew something wasn't right. They didn't know how to fix it. People in Wales flagged this up many years before because they were sending kids over to Bristol and they realised quite a few of them weren't coming back. They knew there were quality issues there, but there was no process for doing anything about it. I was summoned to give evidence at the Bristol inquiry, and I thought I was one of the good guys, so I didn't get any legal advice, which was probably a mistake. And at one stage, I was vaguely threatened with a custodial sentence for not revealing all my sources, because to this day, Steve Bolson was the only one brave enough to go public, and he sort of paid with it by sacrificing his NHS career. He had to move to Australia to work. But there were lots of other doctors and nurses I'd spoken to who were just absolutely petrified of going public, because they thought the stigma of being seen as a whistleblower will mean I won't work in the NHS. And that really saddened me, because there still is that sense of a whistleblower being a telltale or a snitch or somebody who speaks up. In fact, we should all embrace this culture of speaking up. It doesn't matter who we are, whether we're a patient or a relative or a doctor or a nurse. If we see something that isn't right on the front line, we should be able to speak up about it. And the managers should create a culture that encourages speaking up, so you don't get this ridiculous situation of people raising concerns and then being gagged and silenced and smeared against because they don't want the concerns coming out. But the real interesting thing for me is that I encouraged publication of heart surgery rates. I said, if we're going to do this life-saving surgery that's hugely expensive, we should publish the outcomes. We should correct, this statistical correction for people who do harder operations on sicker kids, but we should put this in the public domain. The adult surgeons led the way with this, and we've published adult surgery heart success rates for over a decade now, and despite the operations getting more complicated and the patients getting sicker, the death rate has actually fallen. So being accountable and sharing information with patients has actually coincided with the care getting better.